What if humility isn't a virtue at all, but a carefully wrapped trap, dressed in praise and applause? What if what we were taught to see as a mark of nobility was actually just a strategy to keep us obedient, small, and predictable? We've been told over and over that humility is the right path, that keeping our heads down is wise, that staying quiet is mature. But who really benefits from that kind of humility? Us, or the people who gain from our silence? From the time we're kids, we're trained to disappear at just the right moment. Don't show off. Don't interrupt. Don't act like you're better than anyone. And we follow along, because we want to fit in, because we're scared of being labeled arrogant, loud, or difficult. Little by little, without realizing it, we start wearing humility like armor, not out of character, but out of fear. It's not about serving the common good anymore, it's about avoiding conflict. And that's when we begin to lose ourselves. Because real modesty recognizes limits without denying value. But shrinking out of habit, surrendering out of reflex, staying quiet even when we know we could change something, that's not humility. That's self-erasure. In a world where power isn't handed out, where respect is demanded, and where opportunity is fought for with claws out, misunderstood humility can be a slow kind of suicide. And no, this isn't about ego or vanity. It's not about wanting to dominate for the sake of crushing others. It's about surviving without handing over your dignity. It's about moving forward without apologizing for existing. It's about not hiding your voice, your talent, or your vision just because someone else might feel threatened. Because if the only way to be liked is to shrink a little more every day, what's left of you in the end? Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. Not because he was some kind of monster, as he's often portrayed, but because he dared to look at the world without the blindfold of traditional morality. He saw clearly that goodness without cunning is harmless. That humility, when turned into a law, eventually cancels out the individual. That's why he didn't write for the faint-hearted. His words were meant for those who knew that living isn't just about breathing, it's about claiming. For those who sensed that in every submissive gesture, there might be an unforgivable act of self-betrayal. What's really unsettling is how often we wear humility like it's part of our skin. We feel like good people for not arguing, for not shining too brightly, for not making others uncomfortable with our dreams. And that belief numbs us. It convinces us that stepping aside is noble, that staying in the background is mature, that watching from the sidelines is wisdom, while others, no more talented or deserving, push forward simply because they're not afraid to look arrogant. How many times have we stopped just short of a leap because we were scared of being seen as too ambitious? How often have we watered down our words, our ideas, our successes just to avoid ruffling feathers? And the worst part is, in doing so, we don't just lose chances, we lose identity. We get so used to hiding that we eventually forget what we wanted in the first place. Forget what we dreamed about. Forget what we were once bold enough to imagine, before we started apologizing for every spark of greatness. Machiavelli wasn't asking us to be cruel, he was asking us to be clear-eyed. To recognize that the world doesn't run on ideals, but on forces. That compassion without strength is irrelevant, and virtue without a strategy becomes a burden. So the problem isn't humility itself, it's when humility becomes an excuse not to fight. When it turns into the reason other people make our choices, step over us, speak for us. Because someone who refuses to claim their power doesn't just lose it, they hand it over. There's something tragic about those who never find the moment to stop being humble. What starts as a choice eventually becomes a sentence. They begin as cautious and end up invisible. They begin silent out of respect and end up forgetting the sound of their own voice. And when they finally wake up, if they wake up, there's no audience left, no stage. Just the faint echo of what they could have been. Maybe that's why it hurts so much to look back and realize that humility was, in many cases, the mask we used to cover our fear. That we weren't brave for holding back. We were scared. That we weren't wise for stepping aside. We just couldn't bear being judged. That we weren't humble by principle, we were humble by habit. And that habit made us smaller, predictable, easy to ignore. The real danger of humility isn't that it exists, it's that we've turned it into something sacred. When it becomes the only acceptable measure of someone's worth, we create a world where boldness is treated like a threat, where leadership is mistaken for ego, where talent has to be disguised to be tolerated. And in that kind of world, the door is wide open for hypocrites, those who fake humility while playing every move for power. Because the truly humble, the ones who don't want to outshine or stand out, aren't a threat. But the ones who pretend to be modest just to gain control? Machiavelli would have seen them coming from miles away. That's the real dilemma, not that humility is bad, but that it's so often used against us. We're raised to be mild while others are raised to lead. We're taught to obey while others are taught to command. We're praised for keeping quiet and criticized the moment we speak with certainty. So the cycle goes on. And it's hard to break because we've been convinced that standing tall is somehow a betrayal. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the real betrayal is continuing to say we're small when we know we're not. Who would you be if you stopped asking for permission to be yourself? What could you build if you didn't feel the need to explain every move with modesty? Who would feel threatened if you stopped shrinking just to make them comfortable? The answers aren't easy, but they're necessary, because unless we ask those questions, we'll keep calling fear a virtue. We'll keep confusing humility with disappearance. And we'll keep losing battles we never even dared to fight. We've been led to believe that strength lies in staying quiet, in backing down, in not causing a stir. That greatness shows itself in silent self-sacrifice. But what's the point of being virtuous if that very virtue condemns us to invisibility? There's a fine line between being humble and being irrelevant, and far too many people cross it without even noticing. Humility can be a noble choice when it comes from a place of wholeness, but it turns into a cage when it's rooted in fear. And it's that fear, the fear hiding behind so many decisions dressed up as caution, that slowly erodes who we are. Fear of standing out. Fear of being wrong in public. Fear of making others jealous. Fear of not being liked. But what no one really says is this, that fear is one of the worst enemies of our inner freedom. Machiavelli didn't have time for that kind of fear. He knew life in society is a constant battle for position, influence, and survival. Waiting for the world to reward your humility on its own? You might be waiting forever, because honor, power, respect, they don't fall from the tree just because you deserve them. You take them. You go and get them. And not necessarily by being the best, but by being the boldest. The real world doesn't work like the stories we were told. History is written by the daring, not the polite. And that's the kind of truth that's hardest to swallow. Misunderstood humility becomes a filter that dims the intensity of the soul. It makes us second-guess every word before we speak, not for clarity, but to avoid sounding arrogant. It teaches us to hide our passions, our talents, our ideas, just so we don't outshine anyone. We become fluent in apologizing for our existence before we even begin. I don't know much, but maybe I'm wrong though. I'm not trying to sound cocky, but how many times have we watered down our own truth just to avoid making someone uncomfortable? And while we're busy playing small, others, the ones who aren't afraid to stand tall, who aren't afraid of being judged, keep moving forward. They may not be wiser or fairer, but they're more visible. And in a world that rewards perception more than substance, visibility is power. They're the ones sitting at the table where the real decisions are made. The rest, the humble ones, the ones waiting to be invited in, are often left outside the room entirely. There's a quiet cruelty to that dynamic. We're taught to be humble like it's a future investment. Be good and good things will come, they say. Don't worry, your time will come. But that promise is rarely kept. And even when it is, it's usually too little, too late. Because by the time someone gives us a seat, we've forgotten how to sit in it. We've trained ourselves to wait, to be cautious, to take up as little space as possible. So when the spotlight finally hits us, we flinch. We panic. We feel like frauds. Machiavelli, in all his cold precision, understood something we often don't want to face. Power doesn't tolerate a vacuum. If you don't take it, someone else will. And if you don't know how to manage how others perceive you, it doesn't matter how virtuous you are. Because in politics, in leadership, even in daily life, appearances carry just as much weight as actions. If you insist on fading into the background behind a mask of endless humility, you don't just seem invisible. You become invisible. No one trusts someone who looks like they don't even trust themselves. The issue isn't humility itself. It's making it absolute. There are moments when keeping quiet is noble, and others when it's pure cowardice. There are times when giving way is wise, and others when it's just surrender. If we don't learn to tell the difference, we turn a strength into a shackle. The real balance is knowing when to speak without apologizing. when to move forward without looking back, when to take up space without waiting for permission. Because if we don't, someone else will, and that someone is rarely the most just. Eventually, you get tired of waiting to be recognized. You start to understand that showing up fully isn't arrogance, it's honesty. That hiding your gifts just to make others comfortable is, in the end, a quiet form of betrayal. Not of them, of yourself. Because if you don't allow yourself to shine, you'll never be able to lead. And without leadership, talent withers, purpose fades, and life becomes repetition. Humility should be a tool, not a religion. Something you use with wisdom, not something you cling to blindly. It's not about stepping on others. It's about not letting others step on you. It's not about shouting louder. It's about not staying silent when it matters. It's not about scorning the small, but about refusing to shrink when something inside you is begging to grow. That tension between silence and expression, caution and conviction, is where real strength is forged. Not in forced quiet, but in chosen clarity. Not in automatic obedience, but in conscious will. What's heartbreaking is how many people live their whole lives being humble without ever asking why. Without questioning where it came from. Without realizing that what they thought was virtue was often just fear dressed up as advice. And by the time they figure it out, they're tired. The fire's dimmed. The stage is gone. And the world never got to see what they could have offered. So the graveyards fill with brilliance that was never allowed to be seen. But there's still time. As long as you're breathing, there is. The first step is to stop making excuses for your retreat. Stop wrapping fear in polite language. Dare to name what you want without apologizing for wanting it. Because there is nothing more powerful than a person who embraces their full self without shrinking. Who can say, "This is who I am. This is what I'm worth. This is what I deserve." Without trembling. Without a mask. Without needing everyone to feel okay about it. Machiavelli didn't glorify cruelty, like some think. He glorified clarity. And there's no clearer act than recognizing when humility no longer serves you. When it stopped being a choice and become a chain. When, in trying so hard to be good, you've let others decide your path. And when it's finally time to reclaim your space, not with arrogance, but with grounded conviction. Because in the end, the goal isn't to reject humility entirely. The goal is to stop using it as a hiding place and start using it as one of many tools. A tool you can pick up and put down as needed. With intention, with intelligence, with strength. Because true greatness doesn't need a costume. And maybe, just maybe, the most humble thing you can do for yourself is to stop being humble. There's a question we should ask ourselves more often, even if it hurts. How many times have we been humble, not out of virtue, but out of fear that we wouldn't be loved? We were taught to hide gracefully, to downplay our achievements, to look down as a sign of decency. But no one warned us that, over time, this forced modesty would turn into a shadow that follows us even in the moments when we need light the most. Because when you learn to live from a misunderstood sense of humility, you forget how to take up space without guilt. You forget how to say, "I can, I want, I deserve," without feeling like you're doing something wrong. And yet there we were, trying to be invisible so we wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Waiting for someone else to validate our ideas, our steps, our dreams. Treating caution like it was a religion. Pushing down our ambition because we were afraid of being judged. Terrified of that word that gets thrown around like a weapon, arrogant. As if dreaming big was dangerous. As if speaking with confidence was offensive. As if wanting more automatically made us selfish. So we became compliant. Pleasant. Quiet. Perfect for a world that wants more hands than voices, more obedience than leadership, more politeness than freedom. But the truth is, that kind of world doesn't reward those who stay humbly small forever. It uses them. It makes room for them. It gives them a pat on the back while saving the real seats of power for the ones who aren't afraid to be too much. The humble one who never speaks up doesn't rock the boat. And the one who doesn't rock the boat never changes a thing. That's how the cycle keeps going. A society where virtue is measured by how gracefully you disappear, where raising your voice is taboo, and where standing out without apologizing is treated with suspicion. How are we supposed to grow in a place like that? How are we supposed to dream without shame, want without filters, shine without asking for permission? Machiavelli, in all his brutal honesty, gave us an uncomfortable but liberating truth. Don't expect the world to hand you what you're not willing to take. Don't confuse virtue with submission. Don't assume people will respect you just because you stay quiet, give in, or avoid conflict. In his eyes, being good is not enough. You have to be strong. You have to be sharp. You have to know when to bend and when to rise up with everything you've got. And if that means letting go of the kind of humility we were taught to worship, then so be it. Because there's a kind of humility that's honorable, but there's also a kind that erases you. One that grows from self-respect, and one that's born from the desperate need to be liked. One that makes you generous, and one that turns you invisible. The first is a choice. The second is just a habit, a fear, a reflex, a result of conditioning. The real problem isn't falling into that trap. It's not realizing you have. Not waking up. Not fighting back against that quiet rule we were raised with. Don't stand out, don't make noise, don't be too much. But life reaches a point where it asks something else of us. It demands courage. It forces us to examine every time we back down and ask, was that really necessary, or just safer? Were we being humble, or just hiding comfortably in our own smallness? How many times did we dress our insecurity up as virtue so we wouldn't have to face the discomfort of growth? How many times did we cling to, I'm no better than anyone else, because we were scared to admit that, in some ways, maybe we were? Growth hurts. Owning your own power hurts even more, because it means letting go of the story that the world never saw us. It means facing the truth. We were the ones who looked away. We were the ones who backed down. We were the ones who learned how to be harmless in order to be loved. And being harmless, no matter how poetic it sounds, isn't always a virtue. Sometimes, it's just another way to disappear. Real humility isn't afraid of power. It doesn't reject it, doesn't deny it, doesn't treat it like a sin. Real humility recognizes power, harnesses it, and puts it to work for something greater. But getting to that level takes something radical. Admitting we're more than what we've let the world see. Admitting our silence wasn't always wisdom. That our modesty was often just a cover for our lack of self-worth. That not speaking, not stepping up, not shining, didn't make us better. It just made it easier for people to ignore us. And when that curtain finally drops, something new begins. A different kind of humility. Not the one that crawls, but the one that stands tall. Not the one that begs, but the one that chooses. A humility that doesn't need applause, but is grounded in integrity. One that's defined not by what it hides, but by what it dares to reveal. One that no longer dims its own light for the comfort of others, because it understands that shining isn't arrogance, it's honesty. Maybe that's why Machiavelli still makes people uncomfortable, because he forces us to stop waiting for rewards just for being nice. He confronts us with a harsh truth. Virtue without strength changes nothing. Morality without strategy is powerless. Goodness without power is little more than symbolic. And if we want to live with dignity, being just isn't enough. We need to be bold. We need to take risks. We need to let go of the need to be liked and start building a life where respect isn't begged for, but claimed through the truth of who we are. So what do we do with humility? We transform it. We reclaim it. We strip it of the weight that turned it into submission. We use it, yes, but on our own terms. As a tool, not a destination. As a pause, not an identity. Because we are more than that. Because we weren't put here to live behind apologies or to silence our fire just to stay likable. We were made to live. To create. To step forward. To be. Without fear. Without shame. Without feeling the need to explain every step with a disclaimer that we won't get in anyone's way. Being humble should never mean giving up your greatness, or shrinking your achievements, or dissolving yourself into a quiet background just to make others feel safe. The most authentic kind of humility is knowing exactly who you are and still being open to growth. It's recognizing your power and using it on purpose. It's having a voice and knowing when to speak. Not out of fear of being judged, but out of clarity and choice. That's the kind of humility that builds something real, that moves people, that doesn't bow down to the system, but transforms it from the center of your own grounded truth. And once you reach that place, there's no more